Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Elizabeth Colley. I'm joining you today from St. John's, Newfoundland. And we're going to talk about forging a path in the mental health field. As I know, this is something that a lot of people are interested in. It can often feel like there's only sort of one way to do it. My story is somewhat unconventional, and yet I am now recognized as one of Canada's leading experts in post-secondary student mental health. So I'm going to go through a bit of my story. Again, if you have any questions, please, throw it in the chat or raise your hand. I'm more than happy to take them as we go. So I am currently both a technical committee member and a resource development committee member with the Mental Health Commission of Canada, writing the Canada's national standard on post-secondary student mental health, which is the first of its kind in the world. I am also the director of National Mental Health Strategy with Student Care, or Asic, which is a student insurance brokerage that deals just with post-secondary student health and dental plans. I oversee all of their mental health projects, which I'll get into a little bit more. And I'm also the CEO of the Colley Group, which is a consulting firm that I started, which again, I'll talk about a little bit more as we go. So how did I start? It started off pretty much the same as a lot of you. I was at the University of Ottawa. I was doing a BA with a specialization in psychology, just meaning it was sort of like a major, but I had to take a few more classes in psychology. But as you may what might resonate with you, certainly what I found to be true is that none of it really dug deep into any of the topics. It was really sort of surface level, and it didn't give me a really good idea of sort of what I could do with this degree. I had no idea. I took a lot of classes, I did pretty well, but at the end of the day, my question really was, what can I do with this? And I didn't know. And I didn't want to start another degree without really having a firm idea of what sort of this path was. And there seemed to only be one path that was sort of do the PhD in clinical psychology. And I didn't know if I was really ready to take that on yet. And so rather than starting a degree, I did what most people are really afraid of. And I actually took a year off. So during my year off, I decided that I was really going to try to figure out what spoke to me. So I worked in 3 different research labs. One was a child psychology lab, one was a social psychology lab, and one was addictions and neuroscience. Worked in all 3 of them. They were completely different professors that I was working with, but gave me really good experience and gave sort of that deeper dive and understanding what it meant to be a graduate student, what it really meant to be working in each of these fields. I also volunteered in the community. I worked at the Royal Victoria Hospital. I also worked with an old age home. Both of them I thought were really interesting. At one point, I was thinking about going into medicine, so I wanted to work in a hospital and sort of get that experience. And I also took the time to write my GRE. A lot of the times, you have to write the graduate records exam or your MCAT, and you're doing it in your final year. I found that by taking a year off and studying for it and being prepared for it and writing it that way was a really good way to do it, because it meant that it wasn't taking away from my classes and I could really focus on it. And this really gave me the opportunity to explore what interested me. I got to read a lot, I got to investigate a lot, I got to talk to a lot of different people. And really my takeaway from this is that taking time off between your degree literally has no detrimental impact on your career and or your academic prospects. A lot of people believe that it does. I've seen so many cases where people have taken time off, they've taken more than 1 year, they've gone and taught overseas, they've traveled, they've done different degrees to really explore what they want. And this time off really teaches you what you're interested in. And so when you go to apply to what's next, you can speak to it so much more strongly and passionately that it gives you sort of a leg up almost. So there really isn't a detriment to taking that time off. And if you feel that you would benefit from it, I highly recommend you do it. When people tell me they want to take a year off, I always get excited. I always say, do it. I learned so much from that time, and it really gave me sort of the leg up. So next, I did a master's in psychiatry. And I think one of the things that's really important for me to highlight here is that the lab that I joined to do my master's is actually one of the ones that I volunteered in during my year off. This is a huge stepping stone. It's a way to get in. A lot of the times it can be really challenging. If you're applying to programs, no one knows who you are. If you've volunteered in a lab, or say you volunteered at a lab at McGill and they know somebody at a different university, leverage those connections, because if you get sort of the thumbs up from a researcher saying, yes, I know this person, your chances of getting in exponentially increase. So I studied seasonal affective disorder, which I found really interesting, but more importantly, I learned valuable research skills, writing, critical thinking, and leadership skills that were applicable to a lot of the other work that I was doing. Because I was doing my master's, but I was also heavily involved in extracurriculars. And this is really where I started to find out what I really like to do. So I started a departmental student union for the graduate student psychiatry department. I volunteered in the community. I kept doing that. I joined the graduate student council, so PGSS. Your equivalent would be SMU if you're an undergrad. So I joined the PGSS student council. And I began sitting on McGill and PGSS mental health committees. And I think something important to highlight here is that they are always looking for volunteers. There are so many committees at McGill that require students to sit on them that they are constantly looking for volunteers. So if that's something that interests you, find a committee that speaks to you, that speaks to what your interests are, if that's equity and diversity, if it's sustainability, if it's health, if it's mental health, if it's accessibility. I guarantee you there is a committee that represents some cohort or some group of students. I highly recommend sitting on those, because not only do you get to have that experience, you get to meet a lot of people, because they're made up of deans, faculty members, staff members, as well as other students. So it can really help you sort of increase the number of people that you know, the number of people that you're interacting with. It's really beneficial. So what builds your CV? And in my experience, it's really not your degree. I got my master's in psychiatry. That was great. As I mentioned, I learned sort of the critical thinking, the writing, those skills. But when it came to applying for a job and, building what was in my CV, it was everything else I was doing that really bolstered that. So sitting on committees that were relevant to what you're interested in, as I spoke to, you learn about policy, you learn about programming, organization, leadership, and community skills, communication skills. So when you're actually asked in an interview, talk about a challenging project you worked on. When have you worked with people above you or below you? When have you organized something? These are the types of questions you're going to get, and the answers don't normally come from your academic experience. They come from those sort of extracurricular experiences that I certainly had. So I got involved. I was heavily involved in PGSS and McGill, and I worked on health and mental health almost exclusively. And once you join one, it's so much easier to join others. So once you're on one committee and you're sort of known, then if another opportunity comes up, they'll say, oh, Elizabeth, you'd be great for this as well. It's so much easier to join others once you've done one. And you'll start to see sort of the same types of people on all of these committees as well. I sat on a number of selection committees. These are ones where you're looking for either deans, VPs, the provost at the institution. These were really, really interesting, because you kind of get to see sort of behind closed doors, how McGill functions. And they also have really high level people on these. So, you'll have people like the chancellor sit on these. You'll have people from the board of governors. This is a great time to get to know other people, get to know what their experiences are, and certainly get to network. I'm going to talk a lot about networking, but this is really critical, I think, to building your CV. I also built the graduate student orientation program. It was an opportunity I saw. McGill had McGill 101 for undergraduates, but they had nothing for graduate students. So I decided to lobby the student life office and say that we should develop one for graduate students. So I headed up that project. They seemed really interested. So if you have an idea, it's sort of the idea that, go for it, propose it, see if it gets funded. Mine did. I created the Member Services Officer position at PGSS, which oversaw all of student life. And I sat in that role for 2 years. And that really gave me probably the most experience because I got to talk and learn about, diversity of mental health and health challenges. I got to organize different events. I got to engage with various different people. I got to meet with McGill's, top people like the president, the principal, it's principal at McGill, with the provost to talk about student issues. So I got a lot of experience that way. I also got to do a lot of presentations because you have to present at council. So I got more comfortable doing that. It gave me a lot of experience, a lot of things that really built my CV. I also removed the mental health disparity of services for graduate students within the council or the psychiatry, the mental health and counseling office, and I renegotiated our health and dental plan for more mental health access. And the one thing that I think I did really well during this time is I networked. I networked really hard. If anyone knows me, I am really big on networking, on getting to know people, on introducing yourself, about talking about what your passion is. People are often very excited about it, particularly if you're a student sitting on a committee with people from the board or other McGill positions. They love talking to students. It's a great way to build your network. And this is great for reference letters because when it comes to getting reference letters and applying to positions or even other graduate programs, you often need 2 or 3. And if you're doing a master's, as I was, I knew I would have a great reference letter from my supervisor, but that would be one. And I needed 2 others. And so my 2 others both came from the student life portfolio. And because they knew me from sitting on all of these committees and doing this work, I knew that they would be good reference letters that sort of spoke to my ability, not just as a graduate student, but as sort of a community activist and somebody that really cared about the mental health of students. So then I started a PhD in psychiatry as well. I decided to continue in the lab that did addictions in neuroscience. I was looking specifically at the brain response to stimulant drugs, specifically cocaine. And it was something I was good at, but it wasn't my passion. And I found that I was doing the classes, I was doing well, I did my comprehensive exams, and I was doing well, but it was my extracurriculars I really loved. And so my takeaway here is just because you're good at something doesn't mean that it's meaningful. Just because you're good at math or science or something else, in my case, neuroscience, just because you're good at it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you want to dedicate your life to do. So I was presented with the opportunity to switch my topics completely and start again, which, as you can imagine, was very scary. But this time the topic was going to be post-secondary student mental health and help-seeking behavior, which was pretty much exactly what I had been working on in my extracurriculars for the past 8 years. So I decided to take the opportunity and start over. So I did. And because I was so interested in it, it went well. I found that the readings became easier, that I just retained the information because it was something that I loved so much. And I completed my degree in record time, and I defended my thesis 16 months after I started. I absolutely do not regret it. Yes, I could have probably graduated, 3 or 4 years sooner if I hadn't started in the quote unquote wrong program, but I learned a lot from both of them. And so my advice here would be, if you find yourself in a program and you might be good at it, you might not be, but it's just not feeling right, don't stick with it. Do what you love, find that thing that you're really passionate about and go with that. And don't be afraid of making that switch. It was really scary when I did it, but I am so thankful that I did. And I also continued my extracurriculars to maintain those connections. I wanted to continue to build my network, to continue to maintain those relationships, because I knew once I was done my degree, I'd be looking for a job, and I was going to need those connections to rely on. So then I was offered the position as the Medivy Healthy Campuses coordinator for the Association of Atlantic Universities. And again, similar to my master's, I was offered this position based on a connection and recommendation for me from the director of the McGill Counseling Center. So again, I cannot stress this enough: network, 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 because I wouldn't have been given this position otherwise. I was actually offered it without doing an interview. They said that they knew enough about me, and I was offered it sort of flat out. And in this role, I oversaw all 16 universities and 4 community colleges in Atlantic Canada, building an Atlantic-wide mental health strategy, working on institutional mental health strategies, and also working on big projects with the 4 government bodies in Atlantic Canada. And I learned a lot. It was only a 3-year contract. I knew that going in, but I learned so much in those 3 years. Specifically, I think what would be most relevant to you is that you're definitely going to be asked to do things that have absolutely nothing to do with your academic training. For example, doing conference organization. I mean, the people here that organize this conference have some experience. I had never organized a really large scale conference before, from start to finish, from, invitations to planning who the speakers were going to be, to sending out, reminders, coordinating travel, things that had nothing to do with my PhD were absolutely part of my day-to-day work in this role. And don't be afraid to take a chance on something that you believe in. So one of the things that I did within this role was I worked with the government agencies. And so there was a project that I worked on called Healthy Minds Nova Scotia. And it was really important to me to advocate for sort of ubiquitous access to mental health supports in each province, so that no matter if you went to a small school, a big school, a rural school, an urban school, you would have access to the same type of mental health supports. And I'm a huge advocate for e-mental health, or tech-based mental health services. And so I actually lobbied the Nova Scotia government for over $3 million of funding for these e-mental health tools. And it actually got funded. It was included in the provincial funding plan. And it was something I was extremely passionate about, but many people told me would never come to fruition, but they were wrong, and it did. So don't be afraid to take a chance and really try something out. Put together a proposal, go after funding opportunities. You never know sort of when somebody is going to believe in the same thing that you believe in. And on the same vein, people will not always like you or believe in what you believe in, and that's okay. One of the things that I was a really strong advocate for was the fact that there should be mandatory training for faculty and staff on mental health literacy at every institution. And as you can imagine, this got a lot of pushback, particularly from sort of the higher ups at various institutions. Many of them did not like the idea, but a lot of people did, and it was okay. Not everybody agreed with me, but it was implemented at most institutions anyways. And so I had to learn that not everyone would have the same values as me, and that was all right. And then always be looking for or aware of what you need for your next opportunity, your next job opportunity, your next degree, and seek out that learning. So for example, one of the things that I had no experience around was large contract negotiations. I had negotiated our health and dental plan at PGSS, but that was sort of small scale in comparison to what I was doing with Healthy Minds Nova Scotia. We were talking, hundreds of thousands of dollars, large scale contracts. And so I needed to ask for help. And it was a fantastic learning opportunity. I was given the help that I needed, and it's really helped me in the next role that I took on. And it's something that I could say that is a skill that I now have. So whatever you sort of see your direction going, what you see you're going to be doing next, seek out the learning opportunities in your current role that you think will help support you there. Because again, when it comes to interview time and they ask you about those, you can speak about those learning opportunities and sort of what your experience was and how you got there. So on top of the Medivy Healthy Campuses coordinator role, I also had other work experience sort of on the side because I wanted to continue to build my portfolio and my sort of presence in the mental health space. So while I was doing that, I also consulted for some of Canada's top universities on their mental health strategies. I did that as contract work on the side. So don't be afraid to take on small contracts, take on small work opportunities, take on small volunteering opportunities to continue to build your CV. I was also on the Kids Help Phone board to bring crisis text line to Canada. This was something that I was really interested in. I sort of pushed my way into it, saying that if Kids Help Phone wasn't going to do it, I was going to do it myself, which was bold and probably unrealistic. But because I was so passionate about it, I was offered a position on the board to do this. I also engaged with a number of speaking events on post-secondary student mental health because it was something I was passionate about. It's what my degree was in. And so I was invited to do a number of presentations. I very rarely turned one down because I felt it gave me a lot of experience and certainly kept me up to date in terms of what the research was. And then, as I mentioned, I was a member of the National Standard for Post-Secondary Student Mental Health Technical Committee and Resource Development Committee, actually writing the national standard, which came out in October. And I'm now working with a number of institutions on implementation. So my MediV contract was only 3 years. I knew it wasn't going to be renewed. So I was sort of building my CV and preparing for what was next. And I didn't exactly know what that was going to be. So I started my own consulting group, which some might believe is sort of bold, but I saw a gap in the industry. So rather than trying to fit into someone else's model and do a McKinsey or a BCG or another consulting firm where I'd be doing sort of general work, I just started to forge ahead and start my own. And my lesson or my takeaway here is sometimes you just have to do it yourself. I didn't want to be doing general consulting, although I love consulting. I wanted it to be specific to post-secondary students and very specific to what my passion was. So I started the Collie Group in March 2020, and I've since been hired by a number of organizations across North America to assist them with products for post-secondary students, as well as institutions looking for support developing their mental health strategies. And now that the national standard is out, I've gotten a lot of work helping institutions figure out how they're going to implement the standard. The Collie Group now has another partner, Sarah Mughal, who works at Kids Help Phone, and we work together on these various projects. And because I did it this way, I get to do exactly what I want, how I want to do it, only taking on projects that I feel speak to me and align with my own goals and objectives. And I think this is really important, that you don't necessarily have to do it anyone else's way. You can do it your own way. And when you do it that way, you'll find that you get so much more pleasure and enjoyment out of going to work every day. I love my job. I love what I do. I love the consulting work because it's exactly what I set out to do years and years ago, and I've continued doing it. So I'm also now hired as the Director for National Mental Health Strategy with Asic and Student Care. Asic or Student Care, again, is an insurance brokerage that just works with post-secondary students. They have about 1 million students on their health and dental plan, but about 400,000 students on their student assistance plan called Empower Me. And I just oversee the mental health strategy and programming, that Empower Me programming, including the creation of a new mental health platform for students, which I'm really excited about, called, well, it won't be called this, but Empower Me 2.0. So I was hired based on my expertise to say, come in, create a brand new program that we're going to sell. We want it based on best practice. We want it based on your research. We want it based on what students want, students love to engage with. And then we're going to move forward with that. So that is going to be launching in September. And I work with many institutions on the delivery of their mental health programming. And the really interesting thing or really enjoyable thing for me is that many of these people I already know from previous presentations, meetings, and working together. So I know people from the West Coast to the East Coast, from working on the standard, working with the Association of Atlantic Universities, as well as all of my work at McGill and the presentations that I've done across the country. And then recently, I published an opinion piece in the Toronto Star as an expert in post-secondary student mental health on sort of the needs of post-secondary students, the fact that throwing money without a strategy behind it isn't really going to work, and that students often, it's not necessarily stigma that stops people from seeking help. It's actually problem recognition, that students don't really recognize when something is a mental health issue until in crisis or in distress. So this was recently published. Of note or of interest, I was actually told not to submit it to the Toronto Star, that they wouldn't publish it, that it was too big a publication. I submitted it and it was published the next day. So again, another example of people will often tell you something, go with your gut. You don't necessarily need to follow the rules. I tend to do things my own way, and sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it went well. But I'm a big believer in sort of following your passion and taking a chance. And this was taking a chance, and it worked out. So I think to sort of conclude, because I'd really like to take some questions, is that I do not work with a lot of people that do a PhD in clinical psychology. In fact, I work with a lot of people in tech, computer science, public policy, epidemiology, et cetera. You do not need to do a degree in psychology to work in the mental health space. Absolutely not. In fact, a lot of the people that I work with have very diverse backgrounds, have come from very diverse spaces, and it was just something that they were passionate about, and they entered the field in a non-traditional way. The experience I gained working as a student executive and my committee involvement still serves me to this day. I still often pull on some of the skills that I learned, those leadership, organization, public speaking, the things that I learned during that period still serve me well. And when I have interviews, sometimes I will still pull on those as experiences that sort of shaped how I do my day-to-day work. My network is invaluable, so build yours. Take every opportunity you can to introduce yourself, to let people know what you're passionate about, to talk about what you want to be doing, because some people will often interject and say, you know, I could help you with that. I could give you an opportunity. Would you like to check out XYZ? Would you like to volunteer in this capacity? It's invaluable experience. And I've been given opportunities through connections made on LinkedIn. I know this often sounds silly, but it's never too early to start having a business presence. One example of this is I actually just started a student advisory board for the program that I'm currently building. And I actually sought out some of the members based on their LinkedIn profile. I looked for students that were interested in the mental health space, had some experience at various institutions, and then reached out to them that way. So if they didn't have that presence, I never would have known about them. And then finally, follow your passion. Because if you follow your passion, the job will come to you. If you follow sort of what you love to do, you will be amazed at the plethora of opportunities that there are out there and the diversity of opportunities. And so as long as you're following your passion and what you really want to be doing, the right fit will come. So I think I will end there and open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much. I'm going to give a couple seconds if anyone wants to go ahead and type a question in the chat. I have many questions, so I can also start us off if people are still thinking. So maybe one question we could start with. You talked about like your path in post-secondary education. I mean, specifically like getting your master's and your PhD. Most of your work is about post-secondary education.
Yes.
And so at the end, you also mentioned that a lot of people you work with don't necessarily have degrees specializing in this. And so I wonder what your thoughts are regarding like balancing, like pursuing further education, like a master's, a PhD versus like focusing on going into the workforce and getting like on the ground projects going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think most of the time what you'll find is that if you enter the workforce, and have that sort of work experience, then that will be better than pursuing the academic route if you already know what you want to be doing. I do know somebody that is currently, so my colleague Sarah, that's currently working for Kids Help Phone, she's run up against some barriers in her work life and has decided to actually go back and do a PhD in public policy. That's always an option. So I would say from my experience, then most what I know, what I've seen is that people that go out there and have that sort of project experience, real life experience, you'll get to where you want to go faster than if you just stick with the academic route. The academic route is sort of the safe route. It feels safer. It's what we know. But in fact, taking that chance and getting the work experience, you'll build your network, you'll build the opportunities a lot faster from there.
That's a great response. Thank you so much.
And you can always go back if you want, if you want to try something and you feel that, you would really benefit from having the doctor title, which I will absolutely admit gives you some leverage sometimes, then you can absolutely go back and do it. But I wouldn't necessarily just stick to academia because you think the job will come that way.
That's very good insight. I see, Ava just said, great question. Again, encourage you to post questions in the chat if you'd like. Another question I wanted to pose that relates to the overarching theme of this, but also could expand beyond it. In pursuing your own path, obviously it can be a bit more confusing than just, going a prescribed route. What have been your experiences with burnout, and how do you avoid or cope with it?
Yes, I have definitely had my own burnout for sure. That's definitely something I struggle with because I'm the type of person that wants to take on as much as possible. And as you could see probably from some of my descriptions of what I was doing at the same time along the road, there was a lot of it. There was a lot of overlap. But what you'll see is that one of the questions that is often getting posed now in interviews is sort of, how do you have that work-life balance? How do you take care of yourself? It's becoming more and more important because we know that, the statistic is that in any given week, 500,000 Canadians miss work due to mental health concerns. It's a huge problem. And so employers know that. And so they're looking for people that are mentally healthy or have that resiliency. And so you absolutely need to balance it. I myself, I try to take a day off every 2 weeks just to recharge, do my own thing. It served me really well. I find that, people will do things where, they'll take an extended leave between big projects. That's one thing you can do, or just incorporate it into your daily life. One thing that I've done that is really, really simple, but has helped me extremely a lot is that I actually put in my calendar an hour for lunch, and I take my lunch hour no matter what. I do not work through it. I take that time. I will watch a fun show. I'll read something. I'll take some time to myself, but taking that hour, especially in the pandemic when you could just work from home 24/7, so scheduling time for self-care and taking a break and shutting things off when you need to shut them off are critical. Do not burn yourself out because then you'll have nothing left to give back. And if you want to work in the mental health field, it is taxing and you're constantly giving back, and it can be extremely difficult to manage some days, sort of the weight of what you're dealing with, the topic that you're dealing with every single day. So you have to put yourself first. You have to take that time out. So I'm so glad you asked that question because it can be really challenging. What is the most rewarding job or project you've taken part in? Oh, that would probably be my Healthy Minds Nova Scotia project, because people were so skeptical of it, so skeptical that it was going to work, that it was going to get funded. And I got to work with two large student associations, provincial student associations, while we were doing it. And then it did get funded. And I was so excited about the fact that students across the province, no matter what school they went to, would have the same access access to mental health resources. So not only was it really rewarding, but the fact that I got to work so closely with students and government, and I got to learn so much along the way, that was absolutely one of the most rewarding projects I've ever worked on. It was really fun, and it's still running today.
Awesome. I'm going to fire another question at you if that's all right.
Go ahead.
And this one's more focused on your experience as a student, and might be more relevant to people who still have a ways to go till they're thinking about the workforce, but are wanting to get moving with things now. You talked both in your education time and in your career time about working with universities and working, sometimes against people who have different opinions.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, like, what strategies you've learned in order to gain support on mental health in the
Mm.
post-secondary context, and also if you find there's like specific routes or like specific people that are best to ally with in your approaches.
Yeah, I think the allyship is a huge thing. Find that ally, because if you're a student, it could be extremely difficult to sort of have your voice heard and have it be taken seriously. So one of the things that I did is I sort of found my champion within the McGill staff and faculty members. So those people that I knew were sort of on my side. So when I would come, often I would do a lot of research to sort of back up my claims. They weren't just sort of out of nowhere. I would have the McGill data, I would have the research supporting it, and then I would have my champions as well. And this was the case while I was working as well, because I was new to the workforce who was going to listen to me. So sort of find those people that will back you up, that have a lot more experience than you do, and work with them sort of behind the scenes. And then when it comes to the committee time or the official meeting time, you sort of already have your plan in place. So like, you're going to present the research and they're going to say, yes, Elizabeth is right, and this is why we should do this. And so I did a lot of that, both as a student advocate and working outside of academia in the workforce, that I would find those champions. We would go to the committee meetings and, you sort of say your piece, and then the people that are going to back you up are there to support you as well. So my advice as a student to get your voice heard is to find that champion, work together, do it behind the scenes, and then go to the committee and speak your truth.
That's great insight. I almost like, it makes me think of in psychology experiments, like the Confederates, like who know what's going on. But
It's
obviously
exactly like
a more
that.
authentic version of it.
No, but that's what you need sometimes. You need those people that'll just put their hands up and agree with you. And it's better to do that sort of behind the scenes, so find them.
Makes sense. So we have maybe 5 more minutes left. I encourage, again, if anyone has last questions, to share them. Otherwise, maybe one more that I'll ask. For people who are currently students wanting to work in the field in the future, what might you recommend in terms of like how to spend your summer, how to find opportunities, especially, let's say there's internship listings, but none are about mental health. How do you create an opportunity for yourself while you're still a student?
Yes, well, there's two. I mean, one is, are you willing to do it as a volunteer? Because that often opens up a lot of opportunities. There's not a lot of people that won't turn down, that will turn down a volunteer, which is what I did a lot of, working in the community, some of the labs I was volunteering at. So if it's an experience that you want, that you think will really help you out, I highly recommend, first seeing if there's a paid opportunity, but if there's not, volunteering some of your time in those spaces where you want to get experience, because volunteering can very often turn into a paid position, the next summer or the next semester. Secondly, reach out and ask, especially for non-traditional ones. If there's a mental health organization, jack.org, Kids Help Phone, some of these larger ones, reach out and ask if there's opportunities. They might not have even posted them yet. So early bird gets the worm. I would reach out early and say, are you going to be looking for somebody? or do you know of somebody that is going to be looking for somebody? Because everybody, you will quickly learn it is a very small space. Everyone sort of knows everyone. So if you reach out to one, don't limit it there. Also ask if they know of any opportunities that will come up and see if they can help you make a connection there.
I think that's a great point, of like, okay, don't always assume the person you're talking to is going to give you the job, but they can give you connections,
Exactly.
a piece of the bigger puzzle, I suppose.
100%.
So I don't see any more questions. I could go on talking forever. And in some ways, I'm sure you could too. But we'll be moving on to the next session soon. So I'll leave the room open for a few more minutes if anyone does have questions. But otherwise, I think we're good to wrap up. I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. I have been inspired by the work you do and continue to be inspired. And I think we can all take it as an example of where we can go and where we can take our passions and make them meaningful without feeling like there's something we have to do, or that, there's always a prescribed path.
Exactly. Find the one that suits you best, and trust me, the job will come. I promise.
One thing I'll add too is when I first spoke to you, one of the things that stuck with me is the comment about, jobs that you might be looking for very likely aren't created yet. And how
Exactly.
mental health field right now, like things are up and coming, and it's important to think about possibilities instead of just what's available right now.
Exactly. Neither of the positions I've been in, either the MetaV one or the current one, existed before I held them. So, this sort of niche that I've gotten into of tech and mental health, it's brand new. So positions are currently being created. So exactly, as you said, what you end up in might not even be out there at the moment.
Awesome. So with that, yeah, people can ask questions if they want, but otherwise I encourage people to follow through and attend the next sessions. I am posting the link in the chat right now, the two different ones. Just bear with me. One of them, I mean, this kind of comes full circle here.